Here's an old chestnut that evolution deniers like to bring out a little too often. If humans evolved from apes, why are there still apes? Like every other argument examined in this series, this one presumes the ignorance of the audience. Now, the person making the argument may not know any better either, but if those listening know even a little bit about what the theory of evolution actually says, about how evolution actually works, the argument falls apart. That's because it gets evolution wrong in two ways. Both fallacies are immediately obvious, even if you, like me, have only a good layman's understanding of the subject. If the only place you've ever heard about evolution is in church, you might not notice. And I doubt your pastor, or whoever might be making this argument, is going to go out of his way to explain it to you. First, when a scientist says that humans evolved from apes, he's not talking about modern apes. In fact, a biologist might not even use the word ape. To avoid confusion, the term hominid is preferred when discussing the biological family that includes gorillas, chimpanzees, orangutans, and people, the so-called great apes. Our closest living relatives are chimpanzees. We share over 95% of our DNA in common. But the apes that humans evolved from weren't chimpanzees. Humans and chimps evolved at the same time from a common ancestor that is now extinct. This ancestor probably looked a lot more like a chimp than it did a human, but it wasn't a chimp. If you go back a little further on our family tree, you'll find the common ancestor that we and chimpanzees share with gorillas, and so on, back through time. Modern humans didn't evolve from modern apes. All of the hominid species we evolved from are extinct. Second, it's not impossible for an ancestor species and a descendant species to coexist. Not by a long shot. The most commonly accepted, well-established way in which new species evolve is called allopatric speciation. Now, there are other ways that a new species could emerge, but scientists debate how often they occur, how important they are to evolution in general. Allopatry is the one that pretty much everybody agrees on, and basically it works like this. Sometimes a single population of a given species splits into two populations or more due to migration or geographical factors. Maybe there's an earthquake or a flood, cutting the two halves off from one another, creating a barrier and establishing two populations that no longer interbreed with each other. Each of these two isolated populations can now, over the course of many, many generations, evolve independently of one another. A mutation resulting in a beneficial new trait that appears in one population won't be introduced into the other because the barrier between them keeps members of the two populations from interbreeding. Now let's imagine that the habitat on the right side of the barrier begins to change. Maybe the event that created the barrier in the first place changed the terrain on that side, or perhaps a new predator arrived to prey on that side's population but not the other. Natural selection will now favor different traits for these two populations, and as time passes, they will begin to evolve in separate directions. The habitat on the left side of the barrier might remain the same as it was before the populations were divided. If they were already well adapted to their ecological niche, the animals on that side might not evolve much at all. Even after many generations, they're still the same species as their ancestors were when the populations split. Meanwhile, the population on the right, finding itself having to adapt to a different habitat, may have evolved quite a bit. If the two populations are separated long enough, eventually they will no longer be the same species. If their ranges ever overlap again, they will not be able to interbreed and to produce offspring. The two species could coexist and thrive in their particular habitats. One doesn't have to go extinct just because the other evolved. And in fact, this very thing has happened countless times in the past. Ancestors and descendants must have coexisted throughout the history of evolution, in the interval between the first appearance of the descendant and the final extinction of the ancestor. Evolution works very, very slowly, let us never forget, one generation at a time. Such a period between the first appearance of a descendant and the extinction of an ancestor could easily last more than the entirety of human recorded history. This has undoubtedly happened several times in the recent evolutionary history of our own species. Homo heidelbergensis, which may have been our most recent direct ancestor, is thought to have gone extinct 400,000 years ago. recent enough to have coexisted with archaic Homo sapiens. These basic misunderstandings of evolution are the main reasons why this is such a terrible argument. But I'm also troubled by the assumption of human superiority. What are gorillas and chimpanzees still doing around when we, the state-of-the-art model, are here? This argument seems to be asking. But that's not how evolution works. We think of ourselves as advanced and gorillas and chimpanzees as primitive because we've developed things like language and art and architecture that no other species on Earth has. But chimpanzees and gorillas are just as well adapted to their environments as we are to ours. We're all modern species. We've all evolved simultaneously to our present forms. And evolution doesn't operate with a specific goal in mind. One species doesn't evolve into another because it's moving towards some predetermined goal. A species evolves because it manifests a trait which helps it better adapt to its environment. Whatever works gets to stay. Whatever doesn't work eventually disappears. It's a shame that same rule hasn't shaped the creation versus evolution debate in popular culture, the same as it has in the scientific community. Over the last 150 years or so, the arguments of creationism have been discarded in favor of the evidence-based explanations of the theory of evolution. That's not because scientists have a secular agenda or an axe to grind. It's because those creationist arguments just don't work. We know why there are still apes living alongside humans. It's not a mystery. It's not a point against evolution. It's a dumb, ignorant argument that I'm tired of hearing.